Hi, and welcome, everyone. I am Dr. Jason Pape, chiropractor extraordinaire, bringing you education, information, motivation, inspiration on the regular. That's what these podcasts are doing, giving you all the stuff you didn't know you needed, but it's all right here. I'm going to cut through all the crap from traditional medicine and give you just the great information on how the body truly works and physiology and the best way to support it, as well as sometimes also helping you bring better things into your life. My goal is to have people be the most optimal versions of themselves they can be, whether that is mentally, emotionally, physically, chemically, whatever that can be. So I'm a chiropractor, a functional medicine doctor, and we're going to go through some stuff today. And we're specifically going to talk about the thyroid gland because it's a very misunderstood thing in the body, and it is not properly treated most of the time. And we're going to talk about why that is and what are some alternatives and what goes from there. So buckle up, friends, and while you do that, please feel free to hit that like or a button and subscribe so you can see all the amazing content we do here. And as always, try to follow us on all our social platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all the things. And if you do leave some comments below, we'll do our best to get back to you on those. All right, so here we go. The thyroid gland. What is the thyroid gland? Well, the thyroid gland is this little H-shaped gland. It's kind of behind this little Adam's apple-y area. That Adam's apple actually is your thyroid cartilage if it sits in front of it. And right behind that's the thyroid gland, and that secretes hormones that actually regulate our basal metabolic rate. You know, how quickly our body burns or doesn't burn calories, our body temperature, all those kinds of things. So when your thyroid's running optimally, we're functioning in optimal state. When it's not, we can have problems. You may have heard of things like hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism, and I'll kind of break those down for you. So hyperthyroidism is your body's making too many thyroid hormones. Your thyroid gland's overactive, and we're getting problems like, well, when you see people like that, I don't know if you're under the age of 50, you may not know who this is, but if you are over the age of 45 or 50, you probably know who Don Knotts is. He was Mr. Furley in the old Three's Company, as well as he was in Mayberry. He was the town sheriff or deputy, if I remember correctly. He wasn't Opie, though. Anyway, I'm going way too far back. Anyway, Don Knotts was a very skinny, jittery, anxious type person who had bulging eyeballs, exophthalmos. That is your prototypical looking hyperthyroid. So we're usually a little bit underweight, jittery, anxious. A lot of times have that bulging eye thing. And then hypo, which is the much more common, is when you have not enough underactive thyroid. And that's usually when we see people with weight gain or trouble losing weight, brain fog, fatigue, hair thinning. Sometimes the eyebrows are thinning, things like depression. Those are all things you kind of see with hypothyroidism. So most commonly you see hypothyroidism nowadays, and I think it's a way over just diagnosed condition, and I'll kind of explain why that is in a minute. And it's always treated one specific way. We're going to talk about why that's also not a great issue as well. So the way the thyroid kind of functions is that our hypothalamus secretes something called thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH, right? That goes to your pituitary and says, hey, pituitary, release thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. TSH, that's the big loop we're going to go into today, then goes to your thyroid gland and says, hey, thyroid gland, make T4, okay, thyroxine. T4 leaves the thyroid gland and goes into your body and goes to the liver, where it gets converted to something called T3, the more active version, and T3 goes and tells the cells what to do. It kind of runs your metabolic rate. Now listen, not all T3 comes from the liver. Most of it's done there. It can be a little bit in the kidneys and muscle. T4, and even a little bit in your thyroid, about 20% comes from the thyroid gland itself. But most of it, we're talking about T4 coming from the thyroid gland and then being converted downstream. All right. Now, if your body's not producing enough thyroid hormone, T4, we'll call it the thyroxine, what happens is the body says it'll make less T3, and then the body will go, all right, we don't have enough in the body. Hey, the feedback loop says, hey, pituitary, make more TSH. So the TSH numbers will climb to try to make the thyroid listen better, because your thyroid wasn't listening, so now it needs a little bit of louder shout at it, right? A little more of a force. So a lot of times traditional medicine will look at your blood and say, what's your TSH? That's about all they look at, maybe looking at T4. So if they see TSH climbing or too high, anything over 4.59 is considered high, and we consider anything over 2 to be elevated in the functional world. They're going to go, oh, your TSH is elevated. Your thyroid gland must not be working. We must support it because something must be wrong. All right. That's the number one way it's diagnosed and probably the most improper way to do it. So here's why. The part of this is not telling you, right? So what happens is your T4 leaves a thyroid gland, goes into the peripheral tissue, specifically the liver, the big one, where it's converted into T3, like we said before. The thing is, no one tells you about something called reverse T3. So the body can also convert T4 into reverse T3. Reverse T3 goes to the same receptor sites in the cells that T3 does, but has no effect. So if you have more reverse T3 compared to T3, if the ratio's off, all right, the body may start acting low thyroid even though it's not, and then the body goes, oh, we don't have enough thyroid, we better increase that TSH. So the problem really isn't your thyroid gland, it's what's happening downstream. And that's, to be honest with you, the majority of what thyroid issues are. I'm not saying they all are not, they all are, but I would say in my practice and what I've seen, a lot of the times it is not a primary thyroid issue, it is a secondary thyroid issue. So let me explain that a little bit more in depth so you guys understand a little better. So, imagine so let's say my office is here in Hop Hog in Long Island. So if you're on Long Island and want to come see us, here we are. We're a pretty big parking lot. But if you pulled in one day and you were trying to come see me and you saw almost like no parking spots available and you pulled in, you'd walk in my office and expect the office to be really busy. So let's say you walked in and the office was kind of empty. Well, you're looking and going, well, I look out in the parking lot, the parking lot's almost full. And I look out in the street, a lot of Dr. Pape's cars are driving by. So a lot of those T3. That's my patients at this point, right? Because the busy office means my thyroid's working well. But then you look and go, you know what? I see the neighbor's cars, another suite here or another building right next door. And there's way more of the neighbor's cars than Dr. Pape's patients' cars. So if they're all coming into the same parking lot trying to compete for the same parking spots, and there's more of them than my patients, who might win that fight? Well, the law of, basic standard math says that the people with more people, it would start winning the war. In which case, our sites are filled and our numbers look okay because our T3 circulating T3 might be okay, but now the body's working like it's not. So the body goes, oh, we better get on the phone. So now my staff's on the phone calling people to get in here. So the TSH is the staff yelling at my thyroid to get more people. The thyroid is what's making the patients. And that number might start to climb a little bit. But again, it's not the problem with the people being out there. It's that there's too many of the competitors out there to steal the spots. All right? Because the thyroid's making the cars or whatever, but who's getting in them, right? Hopefully the analogy wasn't lost on you. So what happens is, why would the body make more reverse than regular? Because that would be the problem. Like, well, why would the body do that? Well, it's a normal mechanism. We always have some reverse, but there's definitely things that can push that. When there's more reverse, the body actually will shut down T3 and make more reverse. Again, the same thing with T3. It kind of has this back and forth where they kind of propagate each other to make more of the same. But really the problem is the body will do this in times of stress. So if we talk about stress on the system, the body will prioritize more important systems than it will the less important systems. So let's say you only have so much money in your budget and you have the cable bill and you have the electric bill. You only have enough money to pay one. Which one do you think is going to get paid first? Well, the electric bill, right? You may want to pay the cable bill first because you enjoy your shows, right? But the fact is, without the electric bill, you can't pay that. The cable bill doesn't matter, right? So the body prioritizes certain systems under times of stress. So your immune system is more important, all right, than maybe the fun stuff. So yeah, you might want your hair. You may want to lose a little bit of weight, but your body is more concerned about fighting off XYZ than it is about maybe that. So when your body's in a stress state, all right, it starts to steal resources from other places when the resources are low. So the T3 route versus the reverse T3 route is a longer route that uses more resources than the reverse route. So body's under stress, body has to conserve resources, shuttle it to things that are more important like survival, immune function. And it says, all right, we're going to take some from the thyroid because it's not as important right now. We'll worry about that later. So your reverse T3 starts to climb because it's a shorter route using less resources. And when that ratio of T3 to reverse T3 starts to shift, the body starts to find itself in a feeling of hypothyroid even though the thyroid gland is not even part of the conversation anymore, right? When's the last time you heard me mention the thyroid gland? We didn't. Now, the body in sensing the system might go, listen, where metabolic rate's low, we're functioning low thyroid, TSH starts to climb. But unless you look downstream, you really don't know if that's because the thyroid gland's not working properly and not listening to the TH is spiking, or it's doing something with the downstream. But the fact is, traditional medicine only looks at that TSH and says this must be an underactive thyroid gland. Primary hypothyroidism. Secondary hypothyroidism, or also called thyroid resistance, is when it happens downstream. And that seems to be a bigger issue, especially in the world we live in. Most people are just too stressed. So it's not that your thyroid gland's bad, it's that it lives in a bad neighborhood. Now, I can't claim that I made that one up, but I did steal it, but it was a good one. All right. So really, when you start seeing thyroid issues, the first thing we want to look at is stress on the system. All right. What is stress taxing the system? We'd say the same thing about hormones, right? Your body takes cholesterol and it breaks it down to either steroid hormones of cortisol or the sex hormones of steroid hormones, right? So there's two options. Under stress, it's going to go to cortisol. It's not going to the fun money. It needs survival, right? That's a shuttling of resources. Thyroid takes another hit the same way. So we want to make sure what's going on downstream. And the fact is, even if your doctor were to run TSH and your T4 numbers and your T3, are they running reverse T3? Very, very rarely have I ever seen your traditional mainstream doctor running reverse T3. And even if they did, you then have to do some math to check ratios of free T3 to reverse T3 and total T3 to reverse T3. So basically what you want is the ratio. So you might look at all of them, right, and go, hey, my free T3 looks normal, my total T3 looks normal, and my reverse T3 looks normal too. But where are they in the normal? Because if the reverse T3 is and the ratios are off, you have to do a little math. You divide one number into another. Your total T3 to reverse T3 ratio needs to be above 10. And your free T3 to reverse T3 ratio needs to be above 20. So if they are not, one or both, that means your thyroid is showing resistance, is overconverting. Okay? So that is a big thing to look at. And we do that from a functional standpoint to see how we correct that. And again, it's not about necessarily addressing the thyroid. It's about taking stress off that system for the thyroid. Now, there are other factors that are involved here. So selenium, a very important antioxidant in the body and mineral, is very important for T3 production, but not for reverse T3. So if, let's say, you're deficient in selenium, guess what you might not make? Regular T3. You may make too much reverse T3. And even if your selenium numbers are good, it's not just about your selenium. Selenium needs to be activated into a usable version in your gut by good flora. So if your gut's compromised, you may not have proper selenium conversion into the more active version that your body needs to make T3. Again, you might overconvert the other way. And if your gut is not optimal, well, guess what that is? Well, it's a stress on your system. Your body's immune system is worrying about bad guys in here. It's worried about inflammatory things crossing the gut barrier that shouldn't get in, the leaky gut, causing more stress to a system. Thyroid takes a hit. You guys see what I'm seeing here? Let's say your liver is not doing its job right. Let's say your liver is congested. Well, if you can't convert optimally, that might be another issue. See all the things that are adding up in here? So we want to look underneath. What could be stressing the system? Well, could there be some stealth infections we don't know about? EBV, CMV, Lyme. Possibly. Could there be some strep build living into a gut issue? Could we have dysbiosis in our gut? Yeast overgrowth. Biofilm, right? Where the bad guys all get together and put this like gel-like matrix around themselves, a protein matrix that can protect themselves from the good guys getting in and fighting them off, right? Mental stress. Physical stress. Could you have an injury? All these things add up, right? And one of the things we like to look at is cortisol. So cortisol is a decent indicator of stress on the body. We don't want it too high. We don't want it too low, right? So your body under a time of stress releases cortisol from the adrenal gland. And that is to, in a short burst, is to lower inflammation. So if you went and did a really big workout or ran a lot, yeah, your cortisol level is going to pop up because your body went through this, physical activity. It wants to quell the inflammation. And then shortly after, it drops back down to normal. All right. When it stays elevated for too long, now it becomes pro-inflammatory and it becomes more of a problem. And if it sits there a long time, now it starts to stress the system even more. It's causing inflammation in the body and starts eating up resources. Okay. So too high is not a good thing. Now, After a while, your adrenal glands are pumping out this cortisol. If it's too much for too long, guess what it might do? It might fatigue, tank. And they have this adrenal fatigue, and your body's not making enough cortisol to either respond to stress, or that's still a body under stress. Again, even further along than we want it to be. So again, it's about supporting the peripheral stuff like your adrenals and your stress load to help your thyroid. Now, traditional medicine says, oh, we got to get you on thyroid meds. Here's your T4, your thyroxine. We're going to give you a manufactured synthetic version of T4, and then your body can go and do what it needs to do with it. Well, here's what happens with that. So we give you T4. All right, your numbers start to go up. T4, your T3 is going to go up, right? And you start to feel better. Like, oh, cool. 50 micrograms, I'm doing pretty good. But then after a while, those numbers drop again. Well, why might that happen? Well, I shouldn't say the numbers drop again. You start to feel not as good again. And they go, oh, we got to increase your dose. Not even look at your values, because what happens is you give T4, the body goes, oh, we got more of this stuff. Let's make T3. And then after a while, it goes, this is way too much of this. We're going to start over-converting this, the extra T4, to reverse T3. Now that imbalance happens, you feel like crap again. Oh, TSH starting to come back up. Here's more T4, 75 mics, 100 mics, 125. The numbers keep climbing. It's an inevitable increase. So then people are like, all right, well, why don't we give you T3? Well, they used to. They used to give things like Armor, which is T4 and T3, which would be a nice combination. But the fact is, it wasn't as easy to control the dosing. You got to be much more work on it. It was a little more work in progress to go elevating, lowering, because people, sometimes it would go a little too far, and they found it was much easier to just stick with T4. So over the years, T3 became this thing on the wayside. Like finding someone who can get you T3 is, unless you had your full thyroid moved, is pretty rare. Even then, it's a fight. Again, it's more work. I'll give you that. But doctors a lot of times just don't want to deal with it, and it becomes this standard of care. And unfortunately, there's a lot of dogma in traditional medicine and not as much critical thinking as we'd like. Doesn't mean doctors aren't smart, doesn't mean they don't understand things and how to diagnose. But a lot of times the treatments become very dogmatic. Well, this is standard of care. We have to do it this way. Because once it becomes standardized, where, oh, I want to give this person T3. Well, no one is doing that anymore. Everyone's doing T4, mostly for ease and liability. Well, if you do that, now you're outside the box. Well, maybe now something bad might happen, right? Are we really doing the things we need to do for the patient because we're so worried about being outside the norm of what's considered? We see it in the hospital. We saw it with COVID. Early on with COVID, they would try anything because no one knew what to do. And then after, about 6 months, 9 months, a year, they had their treatments, good, bad, or otherwise, but they would not vary from that. Remdesivir, right? That was the thing. We're going to keep giving this to you. God forbid we try any of the alternative things like glutathione. But we can't change this from this. This is what we have to give these people because this is what we're saying is the thing that works, even though it was really destroying people's kidneys, not really helping them with COVID. Do you understand? So sometimes we get lost in the dogma of treatment. We take critical thinking out of it because we're, a lot of times we're just afraid of liability. But I hope this is making some sense. I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down. Now, then you talk about Hashimoto's. So if you want to talk about the autoimmune versions of hyper and hypothyroid, like Graves' disease is your autoimmune hyperthyroid. Your autoimmune hypo, the more common one, is your Hashimoto's. So a lot of times people are like, well, doc, I got Hashimoto's. I have these antibodies, right? I have these antibodies against my thyroid gland, all right? So when they're elevated, I must have this disease. I have to take this drug, right? Now, when we talk about this, right? We just so you know, no one's curing Hashimoto's, right? When you take these drugs for your Hashimoto's, you're just giving the body a hormone to help it make the thing that your thyroid is not making because it's being attacked by the antibodies, right? Does that make sense? So really, we're looking at two different antibodies. One called thyroid peroxidase, and we also know thyroglobulin antibodies. One that's really attacking the thyroid, one that's like breaking down the hormones. And when we see these elevated, we say, oh, you have thyroid, you have Hashimoto's, you must take this drug now. All right. And the problem is that's more of a response to the problem. So what I've seen in practice, okay, is that you go for this place that the body's under stress, you overconvert. And if you're under the stress for a long period of time, eventually the body starts making these antibodies. It's a response to, not usually the primary issue, which makes the problem worse. Because what do they give you for this drug? They're not treating the autoimmune aspect, right? Your body's attacking itself, right? They're not treating that, right? Tell me the Hashimoto's treatment that attacks the immune system. It doesn't. Now, I'm not saying go do that, okay? Because autoimmune diseases are all about shutting down the immune system when it comes to traditional medicine instead of fixing. All right, let's take a step back. What's an autoimmune disease? Your body should know what's you and what's not you. When that system is not doing its job right, it starts attacking tissue that's not you. That's you thinking it's not you. Autoimmune, attacking our bodies, right? A lot of people with Hashimoto's do not have other autoimmune markers, right? If it's a traditional autoimmune, you should have all your ANA titers should be up too. We don't see that a lot. That doesn't always correlate. We see it at different ages. Again, as we age, our thymus gland gets smaller and smaller. By the time we're 60, it's almost 10% left. And that's the thing that matures our T cells to make them know what's you and what's not you. So that gets worse as we get older. But it's not always about that. It's about this constant imbalance that seems to drive this autoimmune shift. So a lot of times when we can reverse that stress in the system, we see people not only improve how they're feeling and their numbers improve, we also see their Hashimoto start to resolve. Okay? I'm not saying you're curing Hashimoto's. I'm not saying we're even treating it. But I am saying is if you start treating the load on the system, give the body what it needs to heal the gut, the thyroid downstream starts to function better. And a lot of times you'll see reversal of some of these autoimmune issues. But I'll tell you the same thing with any autoimmune. We're going to say, how do we rebalance that immune system? Because traditional medicine is like, all right, the body's not working right. It's attacking itself. Shut it down. Shut the immune system down and block this pathway. No, what we should be doing is go, why is the immune system backwards? It should know what to do. How do we rebalance that? What do we do to fix that system? A lot of that comes down to fixing your gut. A lot of it fixes down to what are we eating? A lot of it comes down to de-stressing the system. So I like to think these things are all reversible. Now, I'm not saying go stop taking your medication. And again, remember, I am a doctor, but I'm not your doctor. So this is just information based on science and clinical experience. And look at research. It's out there. Go discuss this with your doctor. Tell your doctor what you want run for you. I'll give you a basic panel of what I run. All right. But it's important to, try to figure this out. Now, the other problem with T4 drugs is that there's other things in them. Like you're not supposed to take it with food because it can mess with it. Yet there's gluten in the pill. And there's also iron in the pill. You're not supposed to take iron, but there's some iron in the pill too. So and when you look at the 25 and the 50 microgram dose, there's actually more filler in the 50 than the 25. It's really weird. Now, the other thing too is gluten. Let's talk about your thyroid in general. Guess what gluten likes to trash? It trashes your gut, but it also trashes other things in your body. One of those things is your thyroid gland. Your thyroid gland does not like gluten, right? It is not good for it. So there's definitely things we can do to support thyroid health. Now, there's other things I use. When people have antibodies, I use something called protomorphogens. These are glandular extracts that are basically used to help heal the thyroid, but also to protect the thyroid from the attacking antibodies. All right, to help it kind of like sacrifice itself on the battlefield to protect the rest of the platoon from the grenade. So that's something you can use to support it. But when you go out there and you want to look at your blood, basically you're going to ask your doctor, don't just run my TSH, run my total T4, run my free T4 or free T4 index, right? Run my total T3 or my free T3, run my reverse T3, and run my TPO antibodies and my thyroid globulin antibodies. Let's see what's going on here, TGAB, right? TRAB rather. Let's see what they are. Because what's going on here? And then let's do some math and see what's going on here and then make it a protocol. If you really want to add it in there, do a morning cortisol before 9 a.m. All right, that would give us some help too. On top of your other, this is not the full pound of everything I would run, but this is what I'd run for a thyroid. And then you can also run your iodine, your selenium. Now listen, and your zinc, because you need zinc to make a healthy thyroid. The problem with running minerals and vitamins in most basic blood labs, they're looking what's floating around in the blood in the serum. That gives you maybe a 2-3 day look back at what you're taking. You really want to be able to look inside a red blood cell. Red blood cells last about 90 days, give or take your health. They make it shorter or longer. But it gives us an average, okay, of what we're looking at. So you can't really, there's really no RBC iodine or RBC selenium, but you can take a look and see what you're about. Selenium over about 130, you want your iodine, definitely be in the 60s at the minimum. When we talk about your zinc, you definitely want your zinc in the higher end of the normal range, but we like to look inside a red blood cell at zinc And in New York, you can't really run that anymore. You can in other states. You can't run copper in the blood, in the red blood cell. You can't run that in New York State either anymore. But RBC zinc, you want 1200 or higher. These are how we understand. You need magnesium for healthy thyroid function. We want your RBC magnesium around 6 or higher, 6 to 7 tops, all right? Definitely over 5. So these are the things we need to see normal. Without that micronutrient, you could be not being able to give your body what it needs to make thyroid hormone. Now, again, I'm not saying go out and eat iodized salt, right? No table salt crap. If we think we're low in iodine, if for some reason we find that that's the case, through blood work, you can do things like help with natural sources. Tyrosine is an amino acid. So we need protein to make all those amino acid bodies. We have some that are essential, some that are non-essential. But tyrosine is a very important one because tyrosine is the root of not only our thyroid hormone, but our neurotransmitters such as dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. So if you don't eat enough protein, or even if you are you absorbing your protein? You're not breaking it down or absorbing it very well because you may have a compromised gut, or maybe you don't make enough stomach acid. We can't make enough tyrosine. Good luck making more thyroid hormone. So sometimes it comes down to, is our body not even have the nutrition it needs to make the things it needs to make? And where is the fail point? Does it steal it from, if we don't have enough, does it go to neurotransmitters over thyroid? Probably. And if it goes the other way or it's low in general, that could affect mood and function. And if your dopamine is too low, that could affect, depression, anxiety. And guess what happens when you're in those states? Well, you're stressing your system, which taxes your thyroid more. You see how this all kind of comes together? It's very important that we don't just look at the thyroid as this one little malfunctioning guy that's not listening, and that it's being screamed at, and you need to take this drug to fix it because your body just doesn't do it anymore. Here's what you need. I believe it's an overprescribed, under properly diagnosed disorder that needs to be looked at very differently and treated differently. Here's the problem. The fact is, when it comes to the drug treatments, we've got basically a couple drugs. We've got our synthroid, our thyroxins, right? Our levothyroxine, our synthetic T4s. We have some T3s, liothyronine and things like that. And we also have the combo, like the Armor. So we have T4 and T3, that's it. There's nothing to take the stress off the system. They can give you psychiatric drugs. That's not going to fix the problem. It depletes more things like B9, B12, and other minerals and nutrients you need, making the problems worse, even though you may feel better in the short term, right? So what drug do we have to fix what I just explained to you? They don't have a drug to lower reverse T3. They don't have a drug to block the conversion of T4 into reverse T3. If they did, they would be out there right now and everyone would be on it. But they don't. So they're not going to talk about this because they don't have any other way to treat it. Unfortunately, when you're in a certain model, once it leaves your version of what you can treat, they don't know what to do. So yeah, you go to your primary, they might see your thyroid's low, they're going to give you levothyroxine or send you to an endocrinologist, and that doesn't work even if they themselves, they'll send you to an endocrinologist. So the gland hormone specialist. And then what? Once they're going to give you the same drugs, run the same, a little bit, maybe bigger test panels, they don't look at the reverse because they don't have anything to work with you on that. So it's really relies on people like myself and other functional practitioners out there to help guide you to help balancing the thyroid and not having to solely rely on medication. So hopefully that made some sense, understanding this thyroid. Now, one last thing I will say, and then we'll close her out, is that it's interesting. When you are a glucose burner, your body is less sensitive to thyroid hormone than when you are a keto burner. So we notice in fasted states, a lot of times thyroid levels drop a little bit. That's not because the fasted state's bad for you. It's that when your body's in ketosis, our metabolic rate wants to slow down a little bit, right? Because if you think about hunter-gatherers, we don't want to be expending all this energy when we need to conserve a little bit while we don't have food. But actually, your cells become more reactive, or more sensitive, I should say, to T3 when you're burning ketones versus when you're burning glucose. And most blood labs are all, in studies until the last maybe 15, 20 years, were all based on glucose-based metabolisms. So as we find these keto-based metabolisms, we're finding that T3 is not needed as much. And we learned only in the more recent few years that your cells become more receptive to T3 when ketones are your main fuel source, and you're in ketosis when you're burning glucose. So just another thing to think about. So anyway, if you'd like more information about this, definitely feel free to reach out. This is what we do. We come here every week and we go into the why, the how, the physiology, so you better understand what's going on in your body and you can make more informed decisions about your healthcare along with your healthcare provider. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this is not stressing you out too much, but there are definitely things we can do to help you. Again, get a more complete panel. Definitely do some gut rehab. Make sure we're getting good source whole foods. make sure we lower our stress load. Physical, chemical, emotional, any combination, even electrical. We can talk about that stressor. Those systems, when they're overloaded, definitely can affect your body's ability to function. So work with someone who can definitely help you to lower some of that stress load and balance that out so your thyroid can actually bounce back on itself and may not need any kind of other intervention. So I hope this has been helpful. Anything I can do to help, just drop a comment below, reach out, whatever you want to do. Again, I am Dr. Jason Pape, chiropractor extraordinaire. And I'm giving you that education, information, motivation, inspiration on the regular. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Have a healthy day.